Welcome back! So this is yet another video that is kind of a new format for me, but I got sucked into some drama. And it's not my drama, it's other drama. But you'll see. I just couldn't look away and decided I want to comment on it. So let's just jump right in. So last week, a debut romance author named Colby Wilkens came under fire after claiming Choctaw Cherokee heritage, which has been proven to be untrue. Wilkens is the author of If I Stopped Haunting You, which came out just recently on October 15th. Her second book was slated to be released in the springtime, but it has been canceled / put on hold indefinitely, I think. Canceled. And these are both part of a $249,000 3-book deal with St. Martin's Press. So all of this came to light when a New York Post article reported that the nonprofit group Tribal Alliance Against Frauds claimed that Wilkens had no link to any Indigenous group based on research by genealogists who searched back through 10 generations of documentation. I know the New York Post is not the most reputable of publications, but it did seem pretty accurate based on other corroborating reports. And do want to just say briefly that the TAAF is not really highly regarded by some tribal organizations. They are sort of a vigilante justice situation, and none of the tribes endorse them. So do with that what you will. So the TAAF reports that they received multiple complaints about Wilkens, which caused them to question her history, her family tree, and do the work of tracing it. Now, it seems like this is where the problem began. It is alleged that Wilkens made a mistake when compiling her family tree, confusing two men, both with the same name, William Henry Adams, one of which is Indigenous, and the other is a white settler. So while her great-great-great-grandfather was named William Henry Adams, it was the white one. Wilkens had previously written on X, in her whole account is now deleted, but she had said that she had a Indigenous relative that was born in 1888. But based on the documentation from the Dawes roll, the timelines make it impossible for the Indigenous Adams to be her relative. Based on that timeline, essentially her William Henry Adams would have been 1 year old with a son, which I'm just going to go out on a limb and say is not correct. So the Dawes Act of 1887 authorized the President of the United States to divide Native American communal lands into individual allotments for heads of household and for individuals. This process aimed to replace traditional communal landholding systems with a government-imposed private property system, coercing Native Americans to adopt a capitalist view of property ownership that was not a part of their traditional cultural practices. This is taken directly from their website. The Dawes Roll is a database that lists individuals living between 1898 and 1914 who applied for the roll and were included in the publication The Final Rolls of Citizens and Freedmen of the 5 Civilized Tribes in Indian Territory, which was printed in 1914. The 5 tribes include Cherokee, Chickasaw, Choctaw, Creek, and Seminole. Enrollment for the Dawes Rolls began in 1898 and closed in 1907. A small number of individuals were added between 1912 and 1914. This database is essential for verifying genealogical tribal membership. So like I said, while the Tribal Alliance Against Frauds is a watchdog organization and it's not endorsed by any tribe, again, maybe not always on the up and up, but they do aim to help people that may have made a mistake in tracing their lineage. While it is to protect Indigenous folks from having non-Indigenous folks claiming that as their heritage, I think that they do, want to help people. However, they do believe that the responsibility lies with the individual, especially when that person is using their heritage to further their career. Now, it feels pretty much like a given to me that if you're going to profit from your background as a marginalized person, you should be pretty damn sure that that is actually true. Now, there's definitely a part of me that thinks that Colby thinks that she is an Indigenous person truly, and I don't necessarily think that her intent is malicious. Like, she is purposely claiming this to take away from Indigenous authors. I don't know the woman, so please, feel free to sound off in the comments if you have had an interaction with this person and I'm totally, totally wrong. But it doesn't feel like this was something that maybe was done with malicious intent. It was just that she's really delulu and thinks that she's Indigenous. But unfortunately, that is not really an excuse. Being willfully ignorant on something like this is incredibly harmful in ways that go far beyond just deceiving readers. As stated on the TAAF website, fewer than 2.5% of children's and young adult books were published by or about Native peoples in 2023, according to the Cooperative Children's Book Center at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. This means that any books representing Native Americans have an outsized influence on how others view Native peoples. This is especially the case for books published by major publishers with the promotion these books will likely have. This drowns out attention to genuine Native voices who are already working hard to counter centuries of oppression and misrepresentation. So while I wouldn't necessarily have felt this before having learned this information, the official synopsis of her book does feel a little ick now. It's been months since horror author Penelope Skinner threw a book at Neil Storm, but he was so infuriating with his sparkling green eyes and his best-selling horror novels that claimed to break Native stereotypes. And now she's a publishing pariah and hasn't been able to write a word since. So when her friend invites her on a too-good-to-be-true writer's retreat in a supposedly haunted Scottish castle, she seizes the opportunity. Of course, some things really are too good to be true. So that's not the entire synopsis, that's just the first paragraph. But just from that, you can see the glaring irony. Two Indigenous horror authors on a panel together at a convention, but the female main character gets upset at the male main character for selling out to whiteness and throws a book at him, drawing blood, leaving a scar. And while this might seem like a quirky little meet-cute and set up for a classic enemies to lovers situation, it honestly just reinforces harmful stereotypes about Indigenous people being uncivilized and violent. Her second book, If I Dig You, which as I said has now been pulled, is about two characters searching for lost Cherokee gold, to which I just have no words. A simple Google search reveals how distasteful this is, especially from someone claiming to be a descendant of that group. Does the Indian Removal Act sound familiar at all? The ethnic cleansing of tens of thousands of Indigenous people, in part because the settlers claimed the Cherokees were hiding gold. So after days of silence, Colby Wilkens finally posted the following on her Instagram. I've only ever created stories that are authentic to me and my life experiences. I am not enrolled. I have never claimed to be enrolled or to represent the viewpoint of an enrolled tribal member as reflected in my stories and statements. I have grown up with family and in a home that shared this experience, which goes back to my great-grandfather and his extended family and has been a part of our culture and identity. I have always been transparent about my identity and our struggle to gather the paperwork necessary to enroll because of bad record keeping and missing and inaccurate documentation. This is not unheard of and is a difficult part of forming family histories. I'm working hard alongside my family to find more documentation, which takes time. But until I can prove my ties beyond a shadow of a doubt and in alignment with the Cherokee Nation's statement on sovereignty and identity, I will no longer be writing Native stories. My team and I have decided to pull If I Dig You from publication until further notice, and If I Stopped Haunting You will be my last Native story. Thank you for your patience as we work through this. Now, in the days since this news broke, there have been several authors and readers speaking out against Wilkens, kind of stating that she was a bit of a bully in author groups. She was tearing down other writers and trying to get others canceled. And this is just hearsay, but I did think it was worth mentioning because I know some people, had some pretty strong feelings about things she had said and done in the past. So while I'm researching for this video, I found another author named Erica T. Worth who was accused of something kind of similar. It doesn't seem like anything was substantiated, but reading her threads posts about the situation kind of, portrayed a different viewpoint of the situation, and I thought it was very interesting. So she posts, do you know that if you can trace your ancestry to North Carolina, Tennessee, or Arkansas pre-1800s, there's a 100% chance you're of Indigenous descent? Before you're like, distant ancestry, know that because of their non-racist policy, the southeastern nations of Oklahoma have no blood quantum minimums. You have a single documentable ancestor? You can be enrolled. Sovereignty and enrollment are not authenticity markers. There are specific nation-to-nation treaty agreements. Let's not buy into BQ. A quick addendum, it is only the Cherokee Nation, as far as I know, where the freedmen have citizenship as well. Would love to see the others follow. I would love to see persecution of state tribes go away. And if you are not familiar, which I wasn't until I started doing this, BQ blood quantum is the like amount of indigenous blood you have. So like a half, a 16th, etc. And each tribe has like a requirement, except Cherokee, I guess, for like what you need to be considered a part of that group. And a freedman is a person that was a slave to indigenous people who then got their freedom and maybe isn't biologically, I guess, but they were a part of that tribe. Please correct me if I'm wrong. That is my understanding. She then goes on to say, additionally, and I have to assume this goes up the further your family goes back because I'm certainly descended from slaves and slave owners, white Americans are on average 6% of African descent. And since someone on here tried to say something to the effect of random relations with a native, reverse that to any race and see how that feels for you. Rage baiters, I will block you. And then this person, Worn Pages and Endless Coffee, says, I'm sorry, what now? No, genuinely, please explain, because my family is all Tennessee, Kentucky, and North Carolina on one side, and I have never heard this before. And she goes on to say, essentially, I was working with a genealogist at one point, and he was saying that in the last genealogy conference he had gone to, there was a paper about this because it's statistically almost impossible for that not to be the case. I tried to Google around and find a paper, but it may not be published yet. So do with that what you will. I would definitely like to see evidence to back that up because at this point it doesn't really seem, it seems like a pretty outlandish statement, and I totally agree that probably all of us have some little bit of mixed ancestry unless you know exactly like your family came to America recently or something like that, but like, I don't know. It just feels confusing. So another Threads user, Jesslyn Books, had something to say as well that I found quite interesting. And this is kind of long, so get comfy. What makes this conversation about Native identity exhausting is we always have to prove who we are, even if we're enrolled members or keep close connections to our tribes. We exist, we're still here, but we're almost always an afterthought, a relic of the American memory. By the way, I'm Jess, a biracial woman and enrolled member of the Lumbee tribe. It's a reminder that the general public still knows so little about Indigenous peoples and how we've always had to jump through hoops to prove who we are and exist in our own land to the US government. We are the forgotten people until November rolls around. Outside of my family, my tribe, and the online Native community, I often forget that most people don't know a Native person. It can be jarring to be thrown back and forth. Tribal identity is complicated because the requirements are different for every tribe. Blood quantum brings up a whole mess of problems and emotions. In my great-grandparents' generation, people had their heads measured, eyes, hair, etc. examined to see who was an Indian and who was not, by a government white man. The result was you could have one person be considered Indian and others not within the same family. Make it make sense. In my tribe, we have to provide a lineage chart and take a cultural class. It used to be more complicated with a chart, test on local landmarks and history, and interview, if I remember correctly, which makes it hard for lums, who lived outside of our ancestral land to enroll. It takes time and travel to enroll. Native identity is complicated because of generational trauma, whether it being people adopted outside their tribe, residential boarding schools, or even the leftovers of the Jim Crow era. Who we are is tied to our lands and ways, but for so many of us, we grew up either outside those lands or without the knowledge being passed down. Some of our parents didn't pass it down because it wasn't given to them because their own parents were just trying to survive, and others because they assimilated to survive. My generation is making its way back home, but that comes with its own struggles and pain. So much of what outsiders see as Native identity is still Hollywood stereotypes. High forehead, strong cheekbones, straight black hair, stoic, tan skin, etc. Natives across the Americas look all kind of ways, so having outsiders creep profile pictures and say, you don't look Native, or I thought their picture looked sus, adds to the general feeling of being Native enough. It feels like someone else, once again, gets to decide for us. Those of us who are bi or multiracial still feel we have hoops to jump through because we may not look the part, and people to assume we're white or ethnically ambiguous, usually preferenced with a you got something in you, is another emotional hurdle. Another way we have to prove our identity. Not that we have to prove anything, but the feeling is there. For some of you, this is the book drama of the week. For some of us, this is just another weight to the ones we're already dragging behind us, wondering when and where we can be our Native selves. So I think she brought up a lot of really good points, and as someone from this community, I really hold a lot of value in her words. And all this to say, I don't know what to say about this situation. Well, obviously, cultural appropriation is never okay, and what Colby Wilkens did is reprehensible. What right do others have to question if you're a member of a certain community? So here's a little story. I went to a small private Christian school in the mountains of Georgia for college, and I was raised Jewish. Now, I was constantly being questioned on whether I was actually Jewish, because why would I go to a Christian school? Why is my hair blonde? Why are my eyes blue? Why is my last name Hudson, which is very much not a Jewish last name? And it was kind of exhausting, and it completely ignores the fact that my mother's entire side of the family are Hungarian Jewish immigrants. And I was raised Jewish, I had a bat mitzvah, like, very much was that's my identity. And it was just a bizarre thing to be questioned about something just because of how I look in my last name. My dad converted to Judaism, but like, he wasn't Jewish, so why would my last name reflect that? And in Judaism, that lineage is passed down on your mother's side. So yeah, that's my mom didn't marry a Jewish man, but that doesn't make me less Jewish in that world. I don't practice anymore, but it was still very, very just confusing. Like, why does it matter? Why do you care? Like, why are you questioning me on this? So it didn't really affect me in a huge way, but I can understand the feeling of being exhausted by constantly having to prove your background to someone who doesn't like, you're like, why? Author Maisie Eddings writes, "The lying and insidious misdirection of a white woman posing as BIPOC has done horrific harm to Natives and other BIPOC authors. Full stop. But the chatter of publishing companies needing to do research for proof of someone's marginalized identity is an extremely slippery slope that I truly believe will only lead to more gatekeeping and erasure. A person co-opting an identity should not cause other marginalized individuals to go through a screening process to prove that they are XYZ enough. Again, this issue is nuanced, and the harm done to Native and BIPOC authors is horrendous. They shouldn't have to now carry the emotional labor of proving their identity to publishers when there are already so many barriers to entry. Entering a publishing contract with the energy of doubt on the company side for the validity of your claim to an identity is not a safe way to create art. And I completely admit that my perspective on this comes from being autistic and bisexual, and I cannot and will not speak for BIPOC folks here. But if a company asked me to prove I was bi or ASD, that would feel very invasive and undermining, and sort of give the whole, well, you don't look autistic, or you're with a guy, you can't be bi energy. That would make me feel very scrutinized and unsafe with my work when it's already extremely vulnerable. So there is certainly a lot to unpack here, a lot to think about when it comes to situations like this. Should writers be obligated to prove their background, race, religion, sexuality, etc. to be allowed to write about it? Does the burden of proof fall on the author or the publisher to do their due diligence? Colby Wilkens has done a lot of harm to Indigenous authors, so should we really be harming them more by forcing them to prove their marginalized identities going forward? I honestly feel like I could just talk in circles about this, so I want to know your opinions. I want to start a little open dialogue down in the comments. Let me know all of your thoughts, because I am still not really sure how to feel. I think that I probably feel more than one thing, and that's okay, but I would love to get some other takes. So if you liked this video, give it a thumbs up. If you haven't subscribed, I would love it if you would, and I will see you in the next one. Bye!